สวัสดีนะคะท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะคะ So today we have a lot of audience, right? And then I would like to welcome everyone to our topic today,นะคะ writing a literature review, the second topic of the publication series, right? And the previous topic, hi อาจารย์นิ้ว Thank you so much นะคะ the previous topic we learned from อาจารย์นิว a lot, right? On the journal selection, right? And today อาจารย์นิว will be helping us again in the way we write more effective literature review. And as we know him very well, right? Dr. Neil Bowen is a specialist, I would say, a specialist in many fields of academic writing, language learning strategies, right? And teachers, education, and a lot more. So as a new will be helping us in all stages,นะคะ introduction writing and also discussion writing. This will be very important sections for our publication. And the last one is submitting our manuscripts to publication process. These topics will be conducted in October, November, and December. So thank you so much, Ajahn Neil, for your wonderful hand. And today I would like to invite Dr. Pasapong Sipijan, our Dean, Liberal Arts, Thammasat University, to give an open message. So let's welcome Ajahn Pasapong, our Dean, Dr. Pasapong Sipijan.
ครับสวัสดีครับ so good afternoon everyone. Once again I would like to extend our warmest welcome to all the participants to our talk series organized by the Research and Innovation Unit of the Faculty of Liberal Arts, Thammasat University. So I think if you have joined us for the first time, so welcome. And for those of you who were with us last time, so welcome back, and I hope you can stay until the very end of this talk series. So as you may know, I think now we have to try to get our excellent research published in high quality journal, but it's not straightforward, as you may know. So I think last week I think we kind of like got started. We know how to research, right? We know how to try to get to know the policies, the style of the journals, which meets our objective or go along well with the topic that we are writing. I think most of you now have got some ideas about the target journals now. So today, I think the next step is very important as well. So to write a good literature review, it's going to take some time, right? I think it will take weeks or even months. So I think we should not waste our time now. Why don't we give the floor to Dr. Neil Bowen, and then I hope we can have very well organized, comprehensive literature review techniques today. And then I hope you can, at the end of the day, get your research published in international journals as you expect. So thank you very much for Dr. Sanay as well and her excellent team for organizing this very, very excellent event. So thank you very much. So enjoy the talk today. Thank you.
ขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you, Dr. Pasapong and Sanay. Very nice introductions. Welcome everybody on Zoom and everybody who's watching on Facebook. There's probably more people on Facebook. So welcome. This is episode 2, writing a literature review. Quite a lot of stuff to cover in only 2 hours. As far as I'm concerned, the literature review is the hardest part of a paper to write. Most people think it's the discussion. I find the discussions relatively easy if you know your data inside out. It's the literature review that's difficult, particularly if you're new to the field or you've switched to a different subject area that you don't normally publish in. You're pretty much starting from scratch. So you have to read a lot of stuff. So we'll be covering some of that today. Let me share my screen. Okay. that one. Okay. So can everybody see my screen okay? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay, good. So it's writing a literature review. It's difficult for me as a native speaker. I can only imagine how difficult it is doing it in a second language. So I can imagine what a task it is for most of you to do this kind of thing. Today, I'm going to be touching upon 5 topic areas related to writing a literature review. We'll go through each one in turn, starting with planning. So what do we do at the very initial stage? Researching, collecting relevant sources, and then analyzing. So you'll notice that there are 3 major steps which pretty much take up most of your time before you've even started writing anything. Okay, so it's important to get in your mind, what kind of review am I going to do? Because there are different types of reviews, okay, in terms of scopus, focus, scope, things like that. How do I get the good articles, the good literature that I need? Because your review is only going to be as good as the papers that you're reviewing, okay? So we look a little bit of that. Analyzing what your review should do. We all have a general idea that, okay, it has to summarize the field. We have to be identifying gaps and so on. But what else should we do? Particularly if you want to get into these higher level journals, what are they looking for? Because they are actually looking for your literature review to make more of a contribution than just identifying a gap. They want a lot of criticism and a lot of critique. They want you to establish solutions to problems that the field may have, aside from what you're doing in your discussion. Then we look at drafting, some typical organizational patterns that we can use when we're structuring our review. So there's different ways that we can order the information and group the information. And then revising at the end. So what do you look for? Basically, just some questions that you can ask yourself. Imagine that you're a reviewer, your peer reviewing your paper. What are they going to be asking you, pointing out what's wrong in your literature review? Okay, so planning. The first one, what type of literature review am I writing? So you have to ask yourself is, if it's a general research article like the IMRD, Introduction Method Result Discussion, you can get by with just doing a narrative type of review, okay, traditional narrative. You don't have to be very comprehensive there. You can just pick away little bits at a time. If you're doing a larger project, so if you're doing a PhD thesis, or you want to have a review paper itself published, you can do a different type of review. Okay, so what we're looking at here, it's the difference between traditional reviews, what most people call narrative reviews. So you write those to tell a story, hence the title, narrative. We're including a critique of the literature like you'd expect, a balanced critique, strengths and weaknesses, positives and negatives. These can be published as standalone articles. Typically, they have the title, A Critical Review of Something. Okay, so this is a type of paper you could do if you didn't want to collect data or interview people or do an analysis or discussion. You can do a critical review paper and get that published, okay? The other type of review you can do to get published are these systematic reviews, okay? These have become very popular. They use a formal set of methods. So there's actually a methodology you can follow step by step to make sure that you're doing it properly. There's a whole website devoted to it. It has a nice flow chart you can go through. They aim to synthesize all of the qualitative and quantitative evidence that exists on a specific topic or specific area. And you see them, they're published with the title, A Systematic Review of, okay? These are very good papers because a lot of the Q1 journals, they want this type of paper, okay? Because they know that if they publish this type of paper and it's well done, they will get a lot of citations for their journal, because anybody doing any kind of research in that area will have to reference this paper, okay? They'll have to reference it in their literature review. So if you can do these types of papers, it's good for you because the Q1 journals want them, and it'll also get you a lot of citations. So it'll build up your H index, it will build up your profile. Okay, so think about that, particularly if you're doing a PhD at the moment, okay, because you're doing a systematic review for your chapter, literature review chapter anyway. So you may as well try to get a paper out of it. Okay, so talk to your supervisor about that. You can do one together. We're mostly talking about traditional reviews today. I'm going to touch upon systematic reviews first. There's a really good article coming out by Chong and Plonsky. I think it's going to be in Applied Linguistics in that journal. And it's a very good paper that summarizes traditional reviews, summarizes systematic reviews, tells you some of the techniques and methods you can do if you want to take one of these approaches. I put the reference at the end of the PowerPoint. Okay, so planning. 3 questions we have to ask here. What type of review am I doing? Are you doing a scoping one? Meaning, are you just looking for gaps? Are you looking for ideas? Just to try and get something rolling? Are you looking at doing a mapping kind of one? So if you're doing a narrative, you may do a mapping one where you're just seeing what's out there. You're putting everything in relationship to each other. You're very quickly going through things. Or systematic, where you're being very comprehensive. You're being totally exhaustive. You're not missing anything out. Okay, so if there are 150 studies on the particular topic you're interested in, you're reviewing 150 studies. You're doing all of them. Okay, so that's a systematic paper. The focus. So you're going to be explaining and identifying gaps, but what else are you going to be doing? Are you going looking for problems in existing theory? Are you going to look for problems in methods or empirical findings? What can you actually examine and critique besides just saying, this hasn't been done before, okay? We're quite lucky, those of us who work in Southeast Asia, it's easy for us to find gaps, okay? Because most of the research is done in the West. So finding gaps is not a problem for us. So we have to find these other things, problems in existing theory. So maybe there's a theory that's developed in the West, and we can't really apply it here because we have different belief systems, with different knowledge structures, and so on. So you can make a contribution there in terms of expanding the theory in your literature review. And the last one is the scope. So when you're doing your review, as per your research question, it's always good if you can scope it down a bit, okay? If you can put some qualifiers on it, so you don't have to look at everything. So you can confine yourself to a specific context. So if you're looking at university, just look at research that looks at universities. Don't need to look at secondary schools or primary schools. You can limit it to a specific theory. So if you're looking at language or grammar or something, limit it to a specific theory or grammar. So you're not looking at everything that's out there. Time period, research design, discipline, and so on. And also with the scope, are you going to include just the primary sources, peer-reviewed articles, or are you going to look at theses, dissertations, textbooks, secondary sources, these other kinds of things that we can include, okay? If you're going for Scopus publications, Q1, Q2, they're mainly looking to see if you've referenced other Scopus journals, okay? So when you submit your paper, it goes through a test. They will cross-reference everything in your reference list, and they will see, have you referenced mostly Scopus listed articles? Generally speaking, they want 50% minimum of Scopus articles in your reference list. Okay, so as a rough guide, 30 references, 15 of them have to be from very good Scopus journals. Okay, the editor is going to look at those and make a judgment about that. Okay, so before we move on to traditional narrative reviews, I just want to touch upon the types of papers, the types of literature reviews that you can do and then get published. Okay, so you can do a literature review and get the literature review published. You don't have to go and collect data. You don't have to write a discussion or conclusion based around data. You can write a discussion and conclusion based around your literature review of something. Okay, so here's one type of example where you can do what they call a diachronic review. So a review of a time period. Okay, so you decide upon what concept you're interested in. This particular one looks at language learning strategies. So it's kind of an historical account of language learning strategies. How has this as a concept evolved in the research field? So you come up with your research questions. This paper is looking at definitions of language learning strategies, and it's based on 3 time periods. Okay, so the research really starts in 1975, and then it's marked off by different paradigm shifts in the field, where it started off, it's very cognitive, it's very psychological. 1990s, we see a shift, because if you think about how we saw language, it shifted more towards language being a social element to it. So we have more linguists investigating it. And then in 2005, it becomes very social linguistic. So we have a shift again. So there's 3 time periods, we can separate it. The other questions, how do we look at how it's conceptualized and how are teachers and students changed over time? Okay, so those are the 3 research questions that you can answer by doing your literature review. You don't have to collect any data. You're just reviewing literature to answer these research questions. So the scope, your inclusion, exclusion criteria, you limit yourself to 2 databases, Web of Science and Scopus. Okay, you're looking for articles dated between 75, 2019. You come up with a bunch of keywords that are related to what you're looking at, and then you search for those, and you get a bunch of articles back. You limit then in terms of English only, no duplicates, available online, only looking at second language learning. And you end up with 230 papers, okay? But you've looked at 2 giant databases there. So you've looked at a lot of research, okay? So you come up at the end, 230. This is the corpus you end up with. Your 3 time periods, corpus A, corpus B, corpus C. You have 44, 71, 115 texts. So then you just go through and look at the abstracts. You look at the information that you want to get for your research questions. Another example here, this is for a systematic review. Okay, so the other one was for over time. This is systematic. You're looking at all the papers in a particular context. This was looking at language learning strategy in Taiwan. So you have a very narrow context, only research done in Taiwan. Okay, so you do your search again with your keyword searches. This time you have to translate them into Chinese because you're looking at research done in a Chinese speaking country. And you come back with 118 papers. Okay, so that's quite a lot if you think about it's just one country. So how do we manage these then? How do we keep track of them? You can use this literature map, or some people call it an extraction grid. So with these systematic reviews, it's never one person doing it. It's always 5, 6, 7 people. Okay, so if you want to do it as part of your PhD progression, or you want to do it as a standalone paper, invite other people to do it with you, because they can be your readers, they can be your reviewers. Okay, so if you have 118 papers, you divide it amongst the 6 people, you have 20 papers each. That's relatively easy to do. Okay, so you have your 20 papers, you go through the paper one by one, you pull out all of the details that you're looking at. So if you look at this spreadsheet here, we're looking at definitions of language learning strategies, the theoretical framework of the paper, the number of participants, the topic, so what they were investigating, the method they used, and the measures they used. So you can very quickly go through the papers and pull out all of these things, and you put them into your spreadsheet. So all 6 authors can look at the spreadsheet, and you can identify, okay, what's been done, what hasn't been done, What's the most common measure? What's the most common method? Are there any weaknesses in the methods that they use? You see that this particular field, it uses a lot of questionnaires as measures, Likert scale items. So that's a kind of weakness of this field, if you like, okay? Because they're only looking at perspectives on a phenomena. They're not actually observing it. They're not measuring it as such. So in your review, you can criticize that. You can comment on it. You can say that this language learning strategy field, it needs to move away from these measures, these questionnaires. It needs to be more mixed methods, if you like. So that's another type of paper you can get published on your own. Okay, we have some questions in the chat. Isn't it a meta-analysis? Okay, so a meta-analysis, that's when you take a quantitative or qualitative and you look at all the results. Yeah, so it's kind of like a systematic review in that sense. But in the systematic review, you can be looking at things other than the findings. You can be looking at the method. You can be looking at the theory behind it. So the meta-analysis, you're just looking at the actual findings, the results in terms of empirical. You're taking the statistics, your numbers, and you're aggregating all the numbers together, for example. Okay, so you might have different research questions. But that's a good question. Thank you, Ajahn Damron. Okay. So collecting materials, what am I going to use in my review? Okay, so if you're looking at poor quality articles or sources, your review is not going to be very good. Okay, you're going to miss out a lot of important details. So how do we collect them? We can use the natural language keywords in our searches. Remember, when you're doing a keyword search, it only looks for terms in the title and the abstract of a source listed in the database. So it's not necessarily looking through the whole paper, okay? Because the database doesn't have access to the full paper. It only has access to the title, abstract, and keywords. Some databases are only going to find the exact word or phrase you type. Okay, so on Google Scholar or Google, we can make spelling mistakes. We can have words in different orders, and the Google algorithm was kind of sorted out for us. But if you're looking on Scopus or EBSCO or one of these other databases, you have to be quite specific and accurate in what you're typing. Otherwise, you can not get what you're looking for. Okay, so how do we get these keywords? We have to identify the concepts or the variables in our research question. Okay, take a look at this research question. Does physical exercise increase a university student's ability to learn? Okay, so a relatively simple research question. There are three main concepts that we can identify. Okay, so three variables, if you like. We have physical exercise, university student, and learn. So those are the three things we're really interested in. That's what we need to use to generate our keywords for our searches. So we take the keywords generated from these concepts. That's what we've actually put into the search boxes of the databases. So we can do it with a simple concept map. We can draw it out, we can sketch it, whatever works for you. Okay, so you pull out the three concepts or the three variables that are in the research question: physical exercise, student, and learn. And then we look for synonyms, close synonyms for these terms. Okay, so physical exercise, we could also have physical activity, physical activities. We don't need to put all of the letters in. We can use the truncation, the asterisks. I'll show you this on the next slide. So we basically go through each concept or each variable, looking for synonyms that we Okay, most databases use the asterisks. So for example, if you type in think asterisk, you get back think, thinks, thinking, thinker, thinkers. Okay, so you get back all those different variations of the word think. So it helps you because you only have to search one time and you don't have to type in 5 different words. Okay, so think about how you can shorten the word and put the asterisks in there. We can also use wildcards. So this is useful, particularly if you have a variation in spelling. Okay, if, for example, between British and American English, sometimes they have different spellings. We can use the wildcard here to pick up those differences. Or if you have irregular plural inflections or things like that. So woman and women, if you want both of those, you can use the question mark instead of the vowel. So you have WOM question mark N, you get back woman and women, okay? We can also search using phrases. These are adjacency or proximity searches. So we can use the quotation mark like you would on a normal Google search. If you typed in critical skills in students within the quotation marks, you get back that exact phrase, critical skills in students. So if there's a particular phrase that's key in your field or it comes up a lot, we can do that. We can also put in these kinds of operators. If you have W followed by a number, it returns results within X amount of words from the first word, but it keeps the order the same. So if you type in critical W3 skills, you get back critical skills, but you also get is critical and these skills are vital because critical and skills are within 3 words of each other. Okay, so it expands the adjacency of the word that you're looking for, 3 words apart. So you use W if you want to keep it in the same order. And you can use N if the order is not important. Okay, so if you have critical N2 skills, again, you get critical skills, but you also get skills are critical or critical skills. It doesn't matter about the word order. It'll chop and change them for you. Okay, so if you have words that frequently appear within the vicinity of each other in your subject field, you can use those search terms. And we can combine all of this by using Boolean operators. These are often drop-down menus on the databases, but we can type them in manually, okay? So you can type in or, it has to be capital letters so that it recognizes it as a Boolean operator. If you're using or, it's going to increase the number of results that you retrieve. So we could have critical or analytical articles that mention both or either of those topics. And we can use and to try and reduce the number of results we get. We usually use this to combine different concepts. So you could have critical and performance. So then you get articles that only mention both of those topics. Okay. So before you start your review, think about your concepts, your variables, pull them out, turn them into keywords to use for searches, and then do your search at the same time. Download all the articles in one day. Don't spread it out over weeks and weeks. Download everything in one go and then go through it systematically. And we can also combine and or. So we can put the keywords in parentheses, in brackets, critical or analytical, and performance or achievement. So you've only typed in 4 words, but you're covering a lot of bases there by using those, okay? So it's very important that you think about what keyword searches you're using. It helps you, so you're not spending a lot of time or a lot of wasted days just searching endlessly. You can search once and you found everything that you need. Okay, so if you're going to do a review for a Q1 or Q2 journal, you want to be looking at good sources. Okay, you want to be looking at sources that are indexed in EBSCO, Web of Science, Scopus, and so on. So use those actual databases. Okay, they're the best ones to use. If you're going on Google or Google Scholar, you're going to find the same sources, yes, but you'll also find a lot of additional work that may not have been peer reviewed, okay? Particularly if you think about the amount of work that's posted on ResearchGate or academia.edu. Anybody can write a paper and just put it online instantly, okay? So you don't want to be using those kinds of papers in your work, particularly if they may be good papers, but if they're very good papers, you have to question, why are they not published, or why are they not in a good journal? Most guidance, if you're doing a literature review, you should have a look at least two different databases. So don't just do on Scopus and then have a literature review just looking at Scopus. Go on Web of Science, go on EBSCO, go on a different database, because there's going to be articles indexed in databases that are not indexed in other databases, okay? So you're kind of covering your bases a little bit by having more than one source. Okay, let's have a quick go at using these keywords. So we had the question, does physical exercise help undergraduate students to learn? We pulled out the concepts of the variables. We come up with some synonyms for these. Okay, so physical exercise, exertion, teenage, learn, cognate, etc. Those are the search terms we're going to put together with and or, the logical operators. So we can have one search term. We just enter one search term. We don't enter these separately. So we can enter them all together. Let's have a look at how this is done. So we can go on Scopus, for example. So if you're affiliated with the university, you should have a university library account. You can access via Scopus. You can access EBSCO, maybe Web of Science, okay? If you can't do that, then you're going to have to rely on Google Scholar. So you're going to have to be filtering out a lot more things, okay? So we can look in Scopus. Why is it doing that? I think I have to sign in. No, I'm signed in. Okay. I need to sign in here. Yes. Okay. So I'm signing in with my Thermostat account. It was just on my normal account before. So you notice the difference. If you don't have access, you can't search. This is my university library account. Okay, that's better. Okay, so here we can do a search now. We have the search option. Okay, so you see that it's searching within article title, abstract, and keywords. Okay, let me go side by side. Okay, where's my... Okay, so we can look at documents, search documents. I have my search terms. So my first concept, I need the bracket, physical star, close bracket, or teenage so I did and, sorry, and no, that was all. Missed out exertion. and then teenage, adolescent, learn, wait, my typing is terrible. Okay, so you see that you have your one search term, your string, okay, where you have all three concepts, you have your synonyms in there. So you only have to search the one time. I can maximize this. So you see that we have 59 documents. That's quite manageable. We can go through those and quickly skim through them. Okay, so we have limiters as well. You could do it by the year. We can do it by the subject area. Okay, so for example, if I'm only interested in arts and humanities, psychology, social sciences, I can click on those. Limit. Now limit it down for us, so it's a lot more easier. Okay, so 10 minutes of physical activity improves academic performance. We can skim through very quick. Okay, so you do that on Scopus. You do exactly the same search term on EBSCO, Web of Science. You can just take it across and look at the different results that you get. Okay. Okay, so we're going to have a quick breakout room task now. If you look on the Word document that was sent to you, on the first page, you'll see that there's a flow chart, a concept map, and then below that, there's a number of research questions. Okay, in your breakout room, what I'd like you to do is to pull out the concepts or the variables from the research question, put them into the boxes, the concept boxes. Think about synonyms that you can use, close synonyms for each of those, put those in the boxes below, and then have a go just quickly searching on EBSCO and Scopus or whatever database you have, playing around with the search strings, the Boolean logic, the asterisk, the question mark, to try and get down to a manageable amount of papers for your literature review. First breakout room task, it's just to get you familiar with the concept that you need a good research question. You pull out your concepts, your variables, they help you to find the literature. It's good if you can have just one search term, so a long search string, if you like, of words. And then you look in at least 2 databases for the articles that you're going to do. Okay, so this is the part that everybody's probably interested in. How do we assess this research, or what are we doing with it? What goes in our literature review? Okay, so very important that the literature review is not the same as writing an essay. Okay, with the literature review, it's a lot more extensive. It's a lot more critical. Okay, with an essay, you're trying to prove your own point. You're trying to validate your own argument. The style tends to be a narrative or descriptive kind of style. And you have the introduction body, conclusion that we're all familiar with. The literature review is different because it has this very critical style or expository style to help the reader. So we have a lot of features of English modality that I know second language writers struggle with. So modal verbs, we're all okay with modal verbs. They're very easy. We can learn those. But then we have the mood adjuncts. Mood adjuncts are the ones that are attached to the finites. But it's the comment adjuncts that the second language learners need help with, really. Okay, so the comment adjuncts, those are things. I have a really good, nice table. I can send it in the chat later on. I use the table myself when I'm writing because sometimes I get confused about which comment adjunct should I be using here. What's the intensity of it? What kind of meaning does it convey? Because it's very nuanced, okay, and it's very exact language. And I think that's where a lot of second language learners are disadvantaged because they know the literature, they understand it, they can critique it, but when it comes to putting the critique into English, it doesn't come across exactly how they meant it to come across, okay? And that's kind of where they get valued and judged on, okay? So the literature review, it's not just a list of studies, so it's not an annotated bibliography, okay? We see this quite a lot. People will have one study, one paragraph, another paragraph, a different study, another paragraph, a different study again. That's just basically an annotated bibliography, if you like. You're not pulling them in together as such. Okay, so you want to try and avoid doing that kind of thing. It always offers some kind of argument. So there should be some kind of argumentative theme running throughout the literature review, okay? So you're debating something, if you like. If there's no argument to be made, there's not going to be any real need for your research question. Okay, so you've identified your gap. Now you're building an argument in terms of maybe the methodology needs to be improved upon, the theory needs to be improved, or the implications of the research, something that you can build your argument around. You will have identified your gap already in your introduction, okay? If you think about the most popular method for writing introductions is Swales's CARS model. It's a very good model. I use it myself. It stands for create a research space. That's all to do with establishing a gap. Okay, so you should have sufficiently established a gap in the introduction. So your literature review doesn't really need to do that. Your literature review is giving the surrounding motivation for your research question. Why is this a problem area? Why does it need to be researched? Okay, just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean that it should be researched. Okay, so just because you have a gap doesn't mean you need to fill that gap, because you may be able to draw analogies from similar contexts and that will work in your context. So just saying that nobody's done this in Thailand, it's not really enough. You have to add more to that if you want to get into Q1 or Q2 journals. So we have analysis on two levels, okay? Typically, what I see if I'm reading studies being written by Thai students is they do this first one, individual source, one by one. So we have one paper is presented, they analyze, they critique it, they move on to another paper, they analyze, critique the next paper, and then they do the next one. So they just do that down the list, okay? That's not really, it's not helping your reader that much. If you think about what you're summarizing, what I tell my PhD students is your summary isn't really worthwhile, because if somebody wants a summary of a paper, they can go and read the abstract of the paper. The abstract is a perfect summary of a paper. It's written by the people who wrote the paper. So you doing a summary of somebody else's paper isn't really useful because it's already out there. Okay, so you have to do more than that. You have to tie in what's relevant in that paper to my research question, and you only pull out those relevant details. Okay, so you don't need to summarize the entire methodology. If you're only interested in one aspect of it, you can just talk about that one aspect, okay? Because that's what's relevant to you. And that enables you to synthesize more than one study into a paragraph. So for example, if you have a paragraph where you introduce a study and you start talking about how they've used a questionnaire to elicit student perspectives, then you can bring in another study that's used a questionnaire to elicit student perspectives, and you can bring them in together. Then you can bring in another study that's looked at the student perspectives from questionnaire. So you haven't talked about anything else in this paper except for their use of student perspectives through questionnaires and what they found. And then you can bring in the other papers. So maybe they did interviews as well, but you're not interested in the interview aspect, so you can ignore that. You're only interested in the student perspective questionnaire because that's what ties in to your research question. So you're doing this analysis on two levels, the individual, which everybody's already doing, but then the body of research as a whole, okay? So in terms of tying everything together, your review should be answering a number of questions. The obvious one is, what do researchers know about this field? So what have they found out already? What do researchers not know? Okay, so I think most people are pretty comfortable at establishing that in the literature review. That's basically identifying your gap, saying this has been done before, this has not been done yet, or this has not been addressed. Okay, that usually jumps out at you. That's normally pretty easy to get to. These are the ones that we need to focus on. Why should we further study this topic? So why do we need more research on this topic? Okay, what will my study contribute? And ultimately, why is it important to answer my research question? So all of your literature review, it should be building up to your research question. You generally present the research question at the end of the literature review after you've problematized the whole field. Okay, so you're basically selling your research question through your literature review. In terms of your contributions, you're obviously filling a gap. That's the first box you're ticking. But then you need to, I find it, you always get asked, when you get peer review coming back for papers, they always want to know what's your contribution. Okay, so they understand what your empirical contribution is in terms of your results. They want to know, what is your contribution to theory? What's your contribution to method? What's your contribution to teaching practice or pedagogy? What are you actually giving to the field beside throwing a bunch of results at them? Okay, so it's always helpful if you can, at the end of your literature review, explicitly state that you contributed A in terms of theory, B in terms of methodology, C in terms of implications. Okay, so try to explicitly state it. And obviously then in the conclusion, you're going to restate it again. Okay, because that's the selling point of your paper to get up into these higher level journals. They want more than one contribution. In terms of the review itself, it's doing 4 different things for us at the same time, which is why it's such a complicated genre to do. Okay, it's very difficult for those of you who try to teach it to other people. You know yourself, it's a very difficult thing to try and explain. It takes a lot of practice to do it, and it takes a lot of critical thinking ability to be able to do it. Okay, so the first task is your summarizing. Okay, summarizing, it's easy for us to do. We have nice, neat little summaries of all the papers in their abstracts. If we are summarizing one aspect of the paper, it's relatively easiest for us to do. Identifying gaps and problems. Most people can identify gaps. That's not an issue. Problems, you need to engage with the field. That relies a lot on your subject matter knowledge and your general ability to do research in terms of evaluating research designs, evaluating findings, conclusions, things like that. It's these other 2 that we can work on: critically synthesize and critically compare. Okay, so the critically synthesized part, again, you want to move away from this one study, one paragraph approach. You want to put studies in together within the same paragraph under a central topic or central theme. So one topic may be talking about research designs. One topic in another paragraph might be talking about synthesizing the findings of all the researchers. So rather than move between studies, you're moving between aspects of the studies. Okay, so rather than saying A study did this, B study did this, C study did this, you say in terms of methodology, A, B, C did this. So you're bringing them together under the umbrella of a variable, if you like, or aspect of a research design, research finding, or approach that they are using. So that's one way that we can synthesize. And then we can also compare. So you can say that these studies have used this methodology, this research design, whereas these ones use this research design, but they both got the same findings. Okay, so it's just a simple way you need to think about switching what the topics of your paragraphs are, basically. You're switching from the topic being the study itself to the topic being an aspect of research. whether it's the method, whether it's the results, whether it's something else, okay? So the topic sentence is going to change for you. Summarize in your own words, just the key findings, key research, whatever it is you're interested in. Questions you're answering, what do we know again about the immediate area? What are the key arguments, characteristics, concepts, and who are the key figures? Okay, so you should be aware of who is doing who is doing the most important research in this area. Okay, who are the major players? What are the existing debates? What common methodologies are used? So when you're synthesizing, you obviously have your own voice, your own opinion, but you're bringing in other people's studies. One easy way you can do this, if you're writing a narrative review, if you're just writing a review for a simple journal article, you don't necessarily need to be downloading hundreds of articles in one go. You can look at, if you found a key paper, a paper that's very tightly tied to what you're doing, so it has the same research design, it's looking at the same population or same sample, look at what that study has referenced, go and find those references, skim through them, go on Google Scholar, look who has cited the paper that you're reading. So if you have a paper from 2015, okay, who has cited this after 2015? Because they should be tightly tied to what you're trying to do. So you can use a bit of manual searching to take you in different directions, tracing back, snowballing out of these references, these sources. And again, remember, any type of argumentative writing, if the evidence is pointing you in one way, you have to go that way. You can't just select what suits your needs. You have to include everything. Okay, so maybe in the process of doing your literature review, maybe you'll change your mind about something. Okay, and then you'll have to alter your research questions and your research design to go along with what you found in the research, basically. If you're doing a narrative review, a traditional one, usually you can look at 20 texts, 20 good articles, that's usually enough. Okay, if you have 20 references in your literature review, that should be pretty comprehensive enough for what you're doing. A note on critical synthesis. So I get this all the time with the postgrads. So if you're researching how oranges taste, why are you looking at research that talks about bananas? Okay, so they tend to go off topic, basically. So if they're looking at student perspectives on writing, why are you looking at teaching perspectives on listening and speaking? It's not the same. Okay, so make sure that you have a very solid idea of the path you're going down, and the studies that you're trying to critically synthesize have something in common that you can actually draw upon to synthesize them. So generally speaking, they have to have a good overlap with independent variables. So maybe the context is the same, or the setting is the same, the student level is the same. If you're looking at university students' reading skills, there's no point talking about studies looking at secondary or primary school reading skills. It's not comparable. Okay, you need to focus. It helps you then as well to narrow down what you're looking at. Okay, you don't need to look at everything, basically. In terms of comparisons, are some papers better than others? Generally speaking, you can put the bad ones first, because you can just go through them very quickly. Think about how much space you're giving to papers. If you've given a paper a whole paragraph, you're saying that's a very important paper. If you've given a paper one sentence, that's not a very important paper in your eyes, okay? So think about that. Think about how the papers compare to what you're doing. If they're different to what you're doing, maybe you need to justify what you're doing, okay? If they have a different approach, a different design, why are you not using their design when it's already been used and already proved? So you might have to explain that in your literature review, okay? I've had to do it in my own work. So there's been models that are very similar to the models I'm suggesting. I have to explain, why am I not using that model? Why am I not building upon that model? Okay. Critique part, we're evaluating strengths and weaknesses. Questions we're answering. How do the different studies relate in terms of what's new, what's different, or what's controversial? There's generally something that's controversial that people don't agree upon. So you have to mention that. Maybe you can mention a solution to it in your literature review. Or maybe you can suggest why the controversy exists or shouldn't exist. What views need further testing? What evidence is lacking, inconclusive, contradicting, or too limited? And what research designs or methods seem unsatisfactory? And then at the end, analyzing it, putting it all together. So remember, these 4 tasks, they're not sequential, they're all mixed in together. So you're summarizing, synthesizing, comparing, and critiquing, okay? Once you start doing this, once you actually start getting some notes together, an outline, if you like, think about how are these papers going to be organized? Are they going to demonstrate the topics moving through time chronologically? Is it going to be 2 opposing topics showing an ongoing debate? Is there one study that's frequently cited by everybody else, so it seems like a very important seminal study? Has there been some kind of paradigm shift in thinking where the field as a whole has moved away from something, okay? That they moved to a new research design, a new research methodology, something like that. Okay, second breakout room task. I think we can have 10 minutes for this, okay, 10 minutes. There's a very short literature review. Just read it, and then in your breakout room, discuss, do you think it's a good review or bad review, and answer the questions that come after it, in your opinions. Okay, so that task, what did you think about that review? Was it good or bad? Who gives it a thumbs up? Who gives it a thumbs down? It's 2 thumbs down for me. Yeah.
I agree with you.
If you notice, he's done the one study, one paragraph approach. There's no effort to synthesize them.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
He hasn't really given enough detail to support the claims that he makes. We don't know anything about the study itself, the sample size, the method. So we would have to go and look at the paper that he's referencing. And that's the key. You don't want your reader to have to go and look at something. Everything should be contained in your literature review. Okay, if they have to go and look at the original paper, you're not giving enough details, basically. Okay. And it's also not good in terms of what he's trying to compare and contrast. We have a study from 1977 and a study from 2012 in the field of medical experiments. You can't do that. 1977, forget about it. It's so out of date now. Okay, unless it was a seminal study, but we know it's not a seminal study. So he's trying to compare oranges and bananas, if you like. Okay, so those are some things that are wrong with it. So generally speaking, not that good. Okay. We had a couple of questions before the break. I think Ajahn Damrang asked about the kind of size of the literature review. It's a rough guide. You're basically looking at about 20%. So if it's an 8,000 word article, you're looking at about 1,600 words for the literature review, and then about 600 words for the introduction. Okay, so it's quite tight. You don't really have a lot of space, particularly if you're covering 15 to 20 papers. Okay, and again, if you have a larger word limit, then you can extend the word limit of the literature review a little bit. Okay, but in terms of ratios, you're looking at 20% for the literature on average. You can have a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. It depends what type of paper that you're doing. And then Ajahn Sane asked the question about if you don't have a gap, can you still be making a contribution? Yeah, yeah, of course. If you're making a contribution to methodology or to teaching, that's a stronger contribution than just filling a gap, because not a lot of people are doing that anymore. Okay, most things have been done. But you may want to think about reframing that paper into a different type of paper. It may not be an IMRD paper. Yeah, it may be a forum article where you're debating something. Then you can suggest your methodology and just give a little bit of data to show as an example of your model or your framework. You don't need to put a lot of data into those kinds of papers. Or maybe you're just doing a teaching practical paper. They tend to be very short, around 3,000, 4,000 words, where you just, it's like a case study of yourself, basically, where you don't really need much of a literature review for those types of papers. So be aware there are other types of papers we can do to get published besides the IMRD paper. Okay, good. So we're going to move on because we've got quite a bit to cover left. So in terms of organizing your literature review, the 5 most common ways, we have topical, distant to close, debate, chronological, or seminal study. So let's quickly take a look at each of these. Okay, so topical, this is the most common one. It's the easiest one to do. We can break the field into a number of subfields, number of topics. We can break it into concepts. So the concepts related to your research questions or approaches or methodologies, anything that moves us away from the topic sentence being a study, basically. The topic sentence has to be about a topic, not a study. So the characteristics of this organization, we discuss each topic individually, sometimes with individual critiques of the topic, not the study. So you may be critiquing the research design used in this field. Maybe you're critiquing the framework or the theory that people base their studies on, but you're critiquing the background stuff, not the actual each individual study at a time. Very useful if you're organizing a large body of literature, particularly ones that don't have 1 or 2 seminal studies. Okay, so if you're taking on a PhD, for example, you'd probably use this one to organize your subsections. Here's an example of a topical literature review. So if you want to look at a paper and see how the topical one is structured inside the paper, we can recognize these quite easily by the type of language they use. They usually start off with something like 3 important areas have received attention. Then they'd introduce A, B, and C. Then they'd have a paragraph for A. A has been approached from 2 perspectives, F and G. Then you'd have a paragraph about B, and then a paragraph about C. Okay, so notice here that you're discussing topics. You're not discussing individual studies. The individual studies are coming in reference to the topics that you're talking about. Rather than starting it with the study and then moving out, you're starting with the topic and then bringing in studies in. Distant to close. Here's an example of distant to close in this paper. So if you want to see how this type of literature review is organized, it's a kind of topical organization, but the topics are grouped according to how relevant they are to your research question. So it's kind of like you're starting very broad and then you're coming in very narrow. It's like this inverted triangle. Okay, so the studies at the end of the literature review are the ones that are most tightly tied to your research questions. They're the ones that have a lot of overlapping variables. So the independent variables are the same, the dependent variables are very similar. So you can make a lot of direct comparisons between those and what you're going to do. So we start with general, and then we end with very specific studies relevant to your research question. These tend to be very, very useful if you're doing a study that's looking at methodologies or models, because you can talk about general models, general methods, and then narrow down to ones that are similar to yours, and then end with what you're suggesting as your method. Typical language we see here. So we start with distant, far away from what your research question is addressing. Method X, model A addresses. Then we're moving to more similar or more current research, drawing upon method Y, model B can help. And then at the end, this study applies the procedure used in method Z, model C too. Okay, so if you're getting super close, you're actually using the method itself. So you're going from very far away to very close to what it is you're actually wanting to do. Debate. This is another type of topic. Typically, there's a chronological aspect because arguments unfold over time. You're looking at various strands of research where people in opposing fields openly criticize one another. Okay. So, for example, if you're working in the field of grammar, you know there's a lot of different people who openly criticize each other's view on grammar. Okay, if you're working in language teaching, you know that over time, language teaching has changed. So we had audiolingual back in the 70s, then we had a communicative language teaching approach. Then we have now, at the present moment, we have this critical pedagogy approach. So that's a diachronic argument that's unfolding over time. So very useful when you have clear opposing positions that you can identify and bring out in your literature review. Typical language in debate. There have been 2-3 distinct approaches to this problem. The first model posits that, the second model argues that the first model is wrong for 3 reasons. So you're setting up this explicit debate between the models, the theories, or the research that's going on. Then we have chronological. Very easy to sequence a chronological review. You're just putting it in terms of temporal order. So you have the earliest ones coming first, and then you just move through time, basically. Okay, so very useful when your field displays a clear development over a period of time. So if you're working in a field that has quite a long tradition, but it's progressively moved forward, then you're looking at linear progression. Okay, so a field like systemic functional linguistics, for example, that is a linear progression where everybody's adding a little bit to what's come before. But you may be looking at a paradigm shift. So maybe all the research until 2005 followed one particular approach, and then suddenly happened that maybe a seminal study came out and the whole research field switched direction. Okay. Typical language here. This subject was first studied by, who argued, found, in such a date, Y modified, extended, contradicted, X's work by. Today, research by Z represents the current state of the field. So very easy to spot because you're just moving through time. And then the seminal study. Seminal study is when you have one paper that's very, very important. It's usually the paper that has 10,000 citations or 20,000 citations in your field. It's the study that everything else was built upon. So all the later work is organized according to that. Because it's a detailed study, you would devote quite a lot of space to it. So maybe a whole paragraph just to one seminal study on its own. Typical language that we see, the most important research on this topic was the study by such and such. Following X's study, research fell into 2 camps. The seminal work in this field was instigated by. So we have explicit markers telling you what type of review it's going to be. Okay, so we have one more breakout room task. I don't think we'll need long for this, maybe 10 minutes maximum. In the document, you'll see that there are a number of examples of reviews. Just discuss in your breakout room what type of organizational pattern each review is. Is it a topical, distant to close debate? Look at the explicit markers that are in the phrases, they help you. Look at the references, how they position to one another. Look at how much space is gone on, and you should be able to pretty quickly decide which one is which. So I think 10 minutes is enough. Probably.
Actually, Neil, what I normally observe from my experience, right? I observe some one by one summary. It's not a debate type. It's not chronological type.
Yeah.
It's simple summary. I'm not sure if this happens in Thai. This is first or in English.
I think it's a universal thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's definitely a universal thing.
Yes.
Because people think they have to critique the study.
Right.
But they don't realize that when you have a research question, I think it's because when you're undergraduates, you're given papers to review individually. So you get into this mindset of I have to critically review one paper. But when you have a research question, it's totally different because you have a different focus. You're not just reviewing the paper, you're looking to pull something out of that paper.
Right.
And I think that's what we have to highlight to them as they become postgrads.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Okay, so good. I think most people are back. I'll talk about the answers once we've sped through the rest of this. We don't have a lot left. I know I don't want to keep people around. They probably had a very long day.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last step is revising. So you've written your literature review. You're looking at cutting out words, revising it, doing the usual kind of stuff. Basic tips on revising a review. Make sure you have really nice, clear section headings that are descriptive. Okay, so they tell the reader exactly what's in that section. A nice way to do it is if, say, for example, you have 3 different research questions. Maybe you have 3 different sections, each section devoted to a different research question. Okay. When you submit to Q1, Q2 journals, they want to see descriptive headings. So don't write literature review. That's a pointless heading. It doesn't tell them anything. You have to give a descriptive heading telling them what the whole literature review is about, rather than just saying literature review. Think about what you have in your introduction. Okay, if you have a good introduction, you've appropriately introduced it or not, you don't really need to add anything else. You have all your definitions, you have your gap, that's done in the intro already. Then you can just focus on synthesizing all this research that you're looking at. Do you have a clear view? Do you have a thesis that's running throughout each of your sections? Okay. And is this clearly linked to my research question? So is it, when my reader reads it, can they see the purpose of me reviewing these papers? How is it helping them to understand my research question? How is it helping them to understand the importance of your research question? Is the organization clear? So have you used one of those patterns that we just went through? So the 5 organizational patterns. Different sections may have different patterns. So you may have topic in the first section and then debate in the next section. That's perfectly fine. But as long as there's something clear there that they can pull out of it. Do you have topic sentences in each paragraph? Basic stuff. Remember, your topic sentence, it shouldn't be about a study. It should be about something else. So it can be about the research design they use, the measures, the findings. So that's what you're actually synthesizing and covering in the paragraph. You're not covering a study or one single study. You're covering an actual topic. And is your transitions, is your writing flowing? Very basic stuff we have to attend to. And conclusion, do you provide sufficient closure in each of the sections that you have? Okay, so it's basic writing. We all know about basic writing when we teach our undergrads. So in summary, as you read, try to see the big picture. Okay, don't go off topic. Keep your research question in view all the time, so you're constantly looking at it so that you know what you're looking for. Your review should provide an overview and a recognizable argument. So there should be an argument that's flooding throughout each section. Include only materials that help shape your argument. You don't need to include everything that you've read. Okay, so you may have read 50 papers, only 10 of them are relevant. You only put those 10 in there, okay? Try not to be putting textbook material into your literature review. Textbook material, usually that goes in the intro or the methods. We are just looking at empirical stuff in the review. Balance your summary and your analysis. Give your reader enough information so they don't have to go and look at the original source for stuff. So things like sample sizes, measures, these are important things that we need to include, particularly if you're going to criticize somebody's findings. Why are you criticizing their findings? Because they had a small sample size, because it's not generalizable, because they used a measure they shouldn't have used, okay? Be meticulous with your citation practices. So pay attention to the small details. If a reviewer looks at your paper and you can't reference correctly, they're going to think that you can't write a paper correctly, because doing references, doing formatting, it's very easy. You just have to follow guidelines for doing it. Okay, so make sure that you know whatever style guide they've asked you to use, you've done exactly what the style guide tells you to. And keep in mind your purpose for writing. How is the review going to benefit your readers? So yes, the peer reviewer is probably going to know more about the subject than you, but the people who read the journal, they may not know anything about the subject. So you have to give them enough information so they can understand your research question. They understand what all the concepts in your research question mean. Okay, so you defined all your terms. They understand how your review is contributing to framing your research question. Okay. And there's the references. Yeah, finished on time for once. That's a miracle. Okay, so these are some nice references. The Norris and Ortega one, that's a nice one if you're doing research in language learning and teaching. It's a book chapter, so it's nice and easy to read. It's not too heavy. And the one by Chong and Plonsky, that's a very good study that's going to be out soon. So there's a DOI number for it. It's not online yet, but I'm sure it's going to be in a journal very, very soon. So those are two key works that you should read, okay? And then the others are just examples of papers. Okay. Good, I can stop sharing.
Okay. Let me remind everyone of two QR codes. The first one will be for our work program evaluation, and the second one is very important for everyone. Please click it for your certificate, right? So you got one for your participation, and then I would like to remind again of the upcoming event writing and introduction, right, in October. So please don't miss Ajahn News session. And right now, may I request our Dean, Dr. Pasapong, to give us a closing speech. Yes, thank you.
So thank you very much. So this is going to be a very, very brief closing indeed, because I think you've got a long day already, like Dr. Neil said. So sorry, I just ran to another meeting and came back, but so I think I missed a couple of things, but I'm sure for those of you who have stayed, throughout the session here would learn a lot from Dr. Neil. And then I think it's almost halfway through, right, Neil? You got literature review now. Okay, moving on to introduction, and then you get the pieces together now. So please stay tuned and then come back for the next talk as well. So thank you very much, Ajahn Neil, again for your insightful talks and tips and techniques. And thanks everyone for coming today. So have a good evening. See you next month, right? Ajahn Sneh, yeah, see you. สวัสดีครับ
Next
okay, thank
month
you
ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะคณบดี
ขอบคุณค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ thank you
So everyone, I hope you click on the certificates, right? if any have a question you might talk to อาจารย์นิว for the upcoming event นะคะอาจารย์นิว will be very happy to answer all the question and thank you so much for everyone and for the question we have from colleagues and from อาจารย์นิว our person, right? Our consultant for academic purposes, right? So have a good day, everyone. ขอบคุณมากนะคะขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you so much. Yes, I will. No, actually, we can talk now. I'm not sure.
Okay. Does anybody want the answers first of all to the breakout room task?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, we can give the answers.
Yeah. Right.
Example 1.
Oh.
That's the seminal study.
Yes.
You see that he gives an entire paragraph to Smith.
Right.
And in the next paragraph, he has 3 or 4 studies, and they all refer back to Smith. So that's an example of seminal.
Yeah.
The next one, what do you think the next one is? Example 2. Anybody want to volunteer?
Second one?
Topical.
Topical, right? Okay.
Yeah,
topical.
3 topics coming on.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. What about the third one?
Is it distant to close?
Not distant to close. It's almost. Chronological date, yeah, time.
Oh, okay.
See, for old to
See?
1910 to 1935,
Right.
1980. Good.
Right.
Example 4. What do you think example 4 is?
Chronological order.
It is chronological, but it's also something else.
Debatable, right?
Not debatable.
Oh my goodness.
No, it is debatable. Sorry. It is debatable. It's debatable.
Oh.
My mistake.
Which one? New.
Number 4.
Number 4.
Yeah, 4 is debatable.
Debatable, right? Yeah, right.
Certainly was right. And example 5.
Distant to close.
Yes. Distant to close.
We made it.
It's not very broad.
You mentioned the last one. Yes, here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very broad. Okay, good.
See,
Excellent.
this could be helpful for our students. You know, we are still working.
Yes, yes.
ค่ะ